Hello again, students of ancient history. We are um, about to begin our last of these lectures of our first half of our course, which covers the peoples that moved into Europe and the British Isles, and to some degree, we just finished looking at Phoenicia and Greece and the Minoans, and now we're going to push just a little bit farther into the west and begin by looking at the Celts. And I always like to start out this lecture by looking at all of the European ancestors, the original peoples. This is a very sophisticated name that they have, the Indo-Europeans, which really refers to not so much a cultural group, but a linguistic group of peoples that came out of the Hungarian Caspian steppes here. Remember, if you remember back to our lecture on the people of the Asian steppes, that there is this vast open grassland that goes all the way across here, the regions of Asia here, which we call the steppes. And this last grassland here of the Caspian steppes, there comes a people we call the Indo-Europeans. And they are the Aryans. Again, don't mix them up with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, what they thought were Aryans, but rather this group of people that moved into India and overthrew the civilizations of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and they also these Indo-European peoples began to move into Western Europe. And they form the cultural basis and the linguistic group that makes up all European languages except for Basque, which is over here in current-day Spain, and I believe Flemish, which is up here in Scandinavia. So they're all part of this Indo-European linguistic group. And these migrations out of the steppes, once the horse is domesticated around 3500 BC, it's a very important date and a very important event. Once the horse is domesticated, they are able to use the horse in order to move throughout the ancient world. It really transforms radically human cultures, as it allows people to be able to herd vastly more animals, as well as use the horse to as a beast of burden to plow with, and this expands human culture enormously, and the range of human culture. But around the year 4000, these people of the steppes begin to move west. They push into Europe, and they began to populate the area. And they created small groups of civilization that will eventually become the Celts. But originally, these people are often called the Beaker people, and this is Stone Age culture. This is before really the Bronze Age, and we call them the Beaker people because they have this very interesting form of pottery. No written records exist for this Stone Age culture. These are the same people that constructed Stonehenge and many other massive monolithic, meaning one stone, or big or megalithic structures, meaning big stone structure. And they built numerous megalithic structures throughout Western Europe. And we identify their culture based upon their archaeological record, as well as their pottery. So these are the Beaker peoples that settled throughout Europe, and this doesn't mean that they're one common group, but merely they're identified by their pottery. So let us move forward to this linguistic group, and when I say Celtic or Celtic, often if you're from Boston, but more properly Celtic peoples, are this particular linguistic group, and this is not. It's important to know that the Celts are not one universal culture; that they were much different, but they all spoke a common language or a similar language, and they come out of this region, the Hallstatt region in current-day Austria near Salzburg, where they've discovered sort of the fount of the Celts, and they moved in and pushed out the Beaker people. They developed iron weapons, and the Beaker people could not resist them effectively in warfare, and so the Celts pushed out, overwhelmed, exterminated in some cases the poor Beaker people. And as they moved into these regions of the world, such as the British Isles, they pushed the Beaker people into the fringes of society, and the Romans will do unto the Celts what the Celts did unto the Beaker people. So the regions today of Wales, of northern Scotland and the Highlands, and Ireland are often referred to as the Celtic Fringe, because this is where the only remaining Celtic cultures were pushed into the mountains and hills of these remote regions of the world by the Romans. So the Celts expand enormously. Their linguistic group expands enormously. So let us. This is another map you can kind of see where Celts went, and sort of the groups of Celts, because they were different to some degree, but they again have this common language. And here you can see in this map, this is a Roman map, of course, so it's a bit later than the earlier periods, but you can see that these Celts are organized based upon their tribal groups. They are not an urban culture. They are a radically rural culture, and they lived within tribal groups who spoke a common language. So what was Celtic society like? I think often it gets a very ringing endorsement that this was a very good, very small scale society, that that this is how people were truly supposed to live. Celtic society was often very brutal. They were very warlike. There were lots of tribal infighting. That it was not a cohesive, peaceful, pastoral society that is often played out to be in movies and books and such. But again, I would stress how rural it is. They have no large urban centers. So 100 to 200 person town is a massive community for the Celts. And they were pastoralist primarily. They don't do a lot of agricultural farming, right? So they're not sowing crops and things like this to any large degree, but rather they are doing sheep and cattle farming. So they are pastoralists, but they are specialists in weapon making, and this is what allows them to spread and be so highly effective in spreading their culture, is their weapons. And they are even able to sack Rome in 390 BC. And we don't have any written sources from the Celts themselves of the early periods. So we can only go what their oral mythology has passed down to later times. And there's a very famous story in Ireland of Tain Bocutin, which is the cattle raid of Cooley. And this tells us, like all things, Joseph Campbell tells us that there is a kernel of history in all myth, but it also is indicative of what societies found important. And that there is this particularly great bull that is able to produce the finest cattle, and these two warring factions both want the bull, and so they go to war to try and find and get this great bull from heaven. And it shows us the importance that cattle had in this society, because they don't have money, they don't have coinage. Their wealth, how they build wealth, their mediums of exchange are in cattle. That is the most valuable thing to this society. Again, pastoralists. So Celtic spirituality is something that's often highly played up, I think, in our own culture, that they sort of were in tune with nature, and that they were have this deeper connection with the world than what other later monotheistic religions will. And the Celts were pantheists, meaning they had many gods. They had many animistic forms of religion within their or spirituality within their culture. They had meaning that they would potentially worship trees and elements of the earth, water sources, things like that, much like we saw with the early Chinese. And they very much had a dualistic concept of the soul, if you can really say it was a soul. But the living essence within the human body is transformed. That it lives within this world, and it lives on in nature. That it becomes part of this pantheistic concept of God. That there's a sort of a greater soul that it becomes part of. There's some evidence that maybe the Celts practiced human sacrifice in certain cases. It's not extremely definitive, but there is some evidence of this. And you will see in all kinds of Celtic art, you will see this triple face. And looking back to Egypt or other societies that we have examined, Hinduism, that there is the birth, the life, and the death, or the rebirth, right? That is part of this cycle, this cyclical understanding of spirituality that goes along with the seasons. That things are born, they live, and they die, and they come back again, right? So you have birth, death, rebirth. And I just want to say this is kind of a fun thing, and normally I'm giving this lecture around Halloween. So the holiday of Samhain, is meant to celebrate the ghosts of the dead, the ancestors, that they would come back one day in the year, and that could be good, that could be bad, but it is memorialized in our own celebration of Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day. The church incorporates this Celtic holiday of Samhain into its liturgical rituals. That's the commemoration of all the saints on this one particular day. But this is a Celtic holiday, so when you celebrate Halloween this year, you can know that you are preserving Celtic culture in the celebration of Halloween. And there's sort of this fun element within the Celts, that there were these Druids, these great priestly, scholarly group of people, and they're really only in Britain do we see Druids. And the Romans are the ones who are telling about this, because the Celts, again, do not have written sources. And they are the scholars, they are the priests, they are kind of the wise people of their society, and they had to study with other Druids in order to learn everything that they had to know. So they were the philosophers, they were the priests, so they are in charge of the really high level liberal arts kind of thinking in their society. And it was believed that if they wrote things down, this made your mind weak, that you would fail to be able to remember things when you actually needed to do it. So they did everything by memorization. So this generally took 20 years to become a full Druidic scholar, or a Druidic priest. And these people then would go out and they would teach, that they would do the proper religious rituals around Stonehenge and things like this. They would be in the courts of kings. They were highly sought after because they're highly educated, the most highly educated people in Celtic society. So the Celts eventually will be pushed out by the Romans, and as I said, the only places that their society really continued on was in um, Wales and the rugged mountain regions of the British Isles, and in Wales and Ireland, as well as in the Highlands of Scotland. So this is the only place that Celts, Celtic religion, Celtic culture is preserved. And even today, with when you hear them speaking Gaelic, or they speak Welsh there in the British Isles, that this is a preservation of Celtic culture. So I hope this lecture has brought some attention to you to the importance of Celtic culture and the ancestors of Europe, and how that they were able to come about. So until next time, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.